Hi everyone, we are live. Welcome to the House Democratic Caucus on, I was gonna say February 10th, but it's March 10th. Hopefully everyone had a great break and got to do everything they wanted to do. So we are back in action. As a reminder, floor times this week continue to be 3:30 on Wednesday, 3:30 on Thursday. And then everyone conversation. Okay. But next week, we are changing the time. So this is really important. Next week, we're sticking with 10 o'clock on Tuesday. We'll be going to 1 on Wednesday, 1 on Thursday, stick with 9:30 on Friday, and that will be the times through the rest of the session until the end when things just get a little weird anyway. The other thing to keep in mind is it's crossover. So expect for some committees will be much more committee time. I expect longer times on the floor this week, next week, and the week after. As a reminder, this is policy crossover week. Next week is money crossover week. So next 3 weeks will be either on the floor more or in committee probably more. The last update is March 19th, which is next Thursday at 10:30 a.m. We do have judicial retention, joint assembly, and there are 6 judges. So it will take some time. So 10:30 next Thursday, joint assembly. Before we go to a couple of the bills we have to talk about, we have 4 today, I believe. Are there any announcements from anyone? Okay, we are going to start with Martin on H 849.
Good morning. Welcome back, everybody. H49 creates a right of action for constitutional violations. So if it really takes care of a gap. My head's cut off.
See, I don't have that problem.
Yes, I was not that anybody wants to see me, but I'm sporting these nice glasses. So
Lovely.
any event. So the bill really fills a gap. Right now, there's a federal statute, 42 United States Code, section 1983, that creates a cause of action for damages or injunctive relief against state officials who have violated the federal constitution. It does not include federal officials. There are other ways that a federal official can be sued in federal court under federal laws, but they're somewhat limited. And this really fills a gap. The bill would create a cause of action where somebody would be able to sue a federal official who has violated a constitutional right. It could be a violation of the Fourth Amendment, searches and seizures, could be a violation of the First Amendment, suppressing somebody's individual right, freedom of speech, or religion, or right to assembly, could be a number of things. And somebody would be able to sue an official acting under their official capacity. That's called under color of law for damages. And the bill does include state, local, or federal officials acting under color of law and for violation of the Constitution, federal Constitution. It allows for courts that are interpreting this bill, this law, to look at the precedent that has been set under Section 1983, the federal law, which also would include qualified immunity and other defenses that could be brought by officials. We had some testimony from some experts who explained that this is kind of a new thing. There are a couple other states at least have done this: Illinois, California, I think Maryland. So it's not unprecedented, but it's still an open question of really whether we can do this. It hasn't been fully litigated yet. We have very strong arguments. I won't get into the supremacy clause and preemption and those things right now, but if people want to dig into that with me, I'm happy to talk further with them about that. But there's definitely arguments in favor and arguments against, and the court will ultimately decide if this is something that can be upheld. Happy to take questions, and it's on the floor. The vote was 6-5. So there is some opposition to this particular bill, but it's on the floor on Thursday. It's on the action calendar today and tomorrow because it was a short form bill. So you'll see it on Thursday. Happy to answer questions.
Questions? Wow. Yeah, there we go.
First.
Karen's gonna bring the.
Thanks, Leonora Dodge from Town of Essex. Will this also apply then for abuses by, say, federal law enforcement violating people's constitutional rights while detaining people suspected of immigration violations?
It could, if in fact there is a Fourth Amendment violation, if it's a seizure that has been accomplished in violation of the Fourth Amendment, could, yes.
From Burlington, can you explain, it looks like the process of a short form bill need to get fully fleshed out?
So one has to have a vote to take the bill off the wall, so to speak. And we did have a unanimous vote to take up the bill, even though in the end it was a 6-5 vote. I knew I was going to ask to take that bill off the wall, so I had started to work with legislative counsel on the language. It's a fairly short bill, but it accomplishes hopefully a lot.
Representative Paulson, structure. So can you explain the rationale for the folks who did approve your committee?
I can't. I'm not sure why. I'm assuming it's. Well, I'd be speculating. One could be opposed to it because it's not been clearly found to be something we can do. I said it's an open question, but I think we have very strong arguments. We heard arguments of how it could be found unconstitutional, and somebody, I guess, could have decided, well, let's not take the risk. I think the risk is definitely worth it.
Anyone else?
Representative Bishop of Colchester. I just want to make sure I clearly understand. Section 1983 currently allows a federal cause of action for state officials, and this will create an analogous state cause of action against state officials.
State, local, and federal. And it adds federal, and that's the big difference from the federal law.
I don't have preemption questions. We can talk about that on what.
I'm happy to get deeply into preemption questions with you, but I don't want to put everybody else to sleep.
Thank you. Anyone else?
And I'll just one other quick comment. They're on our website, if you look under 849, under public comments, there's some really good pieces that probably explains it better than I would be able to, but I'm happy if you want to take a look. There's like 3-4 documents. Actually, there's one that is a witness document as well. Goes over all those various arguments and probably would do a better job of explaining, but I'm happy to explain it as well.
Last one, Deputy.
Can you hold it closer?
I look forward to the discussion of this one. Some of my constituents for years have been asking for something similar to this. I understand that there may be some parallel discussion, but I think we'll look forward to it.
Thanks.
Great, thank you.
Want me to gun them?
Oh, great.
All right, we're going to talk about firearms real quick as well. H 606 is a firearms bill. It's I'm going to be introducing an amendment tomorrow morning when we take it up. Right off the bat, we're not going to actually look at the bill as introduced because there's some components of that bill that are no longer going to be in the bill. But it does 3 main things. It first of all establishes an offense or for a theft of a firearm. Current law, there's a felony threshold that something has to be worth $900 or more for it to be felony theft. This will have all thefts of firearms, whatever the value, would be a felony. Thank you, Ann Donahue. That is actually from her bill, H19, I believe. The second thing it does is it matches up our prohibited person statute closer to what the federal prohibited person statute is. The prohibited person statute provides that individuals, for instance, who have a felony, violent crime, or misdemeanor that's violent crime, are prohibited from owning or possessing a firearm. The federal law also provides, with not very good language, that somebody with a mental health issue is also not allowed to have a firearm. What this bill does, we don't have the same thing in our law, is it would provide that if somebody has an order of hospitalization or order of non-hospitalization, that during the period that they have those orders in place, they would be prohibited from owning, possessing a firearm. And also if somebody who is found to be not guilty by reason of insanity or incompetent to stand trial, and they are committed for a period of time, but even after that, their oversight by the Department of Mental Health has ended, if their underlying crime was a crime, and trying to remember this, and thank you, Ann Donahue, for helping me on that, that if it's the underlying crime has a life sentence, then the person would continue to be a prohibited person. Did I get that right, Dan? Close?
It's any of the same crimes that are under your existing criminal offense statute.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, which is more than just a knowing. So the third item that it does is for devices called rapid fire devices that would allow you to convert a handgun or a long gun into essentially a machine gun. It would ban those devices. Happily, we received a letter in December from Block that really was in favor of having that kind of a ban. So
Letter from who?
from Block, which is a major manufacturer of handguns. So that's the third item that's in the bill. I'm happy to answer any questions.
It's not up for a vote. What's the process?
We have it up for vote on Friday.
Any questions?
Any exception to the bill for collector or non? Or is it that piece?
I'm not sure. I'll have to get back to you on that. Probably it does, but usually for these kind of bans, collector items or antiques and the like, there's usually, but I'll have to double check that.
Anyone else? Great. All right, thank you. Excuse me. All right, now we're going to have Representative Donahue and Representative McGill from Human Services to talk about a Department of Children and Family Omnibus Bill.
Folks, so this bill originally kind of started last year at the end of the session when we were looking at how we were going to fill our final weeks. And we noticed we had a number of bills that were related to kind of emerging adults and youth within our systems, and trying to address different ways that they're struggling. And I think it's just been a commitment and a focus of our group to not just focus on the higher end systems of care, which can often be in crisis and require a lot of our attention, but also ensure we are looking upstream at prevention and ways we can divert people from ending up in those systems in the first place. So Rep. Donahue and I have been meeting over the spring or the summer and fall, and meeting with family services divisions and other organizations. And we came up with this bill. And it's really, it uses one bill as the vehicle, but you'll notice a number of bills. I'll just kind of go over them and then we can split them up. Which one to do with removing the reach up asset limit, which comes from H554. Protecting Social Security benefits for youth in foster care, which is H269. unaccompanied homeless youth, enabling them to obtain services in lieu of parental consent, age 657, and that's the vehicle for this bill. And then there were a number of bills, which Anne will talk about, strengthening protections for youth during child transport and tightening up restrictions around the use of restraints, as well as establishing new restraint and seclusion standards for children in state's care. And then also creating a prenatal engagement and family support working group. So the section 1 is removing the reach out asset limit. And this will just make it so families will know, with modest savings, will no longer be required to spend down their assets before qualifying for reach up. This is to help ensure that this program is truly temporary and families can save and have a path out. Sections 2 and 3 are around Social Security benefits for youth in foster care. Currently, youth in state's care, if maybe they receive survivor's benefits or SSI, the state uses that to pay for their foster care. And so this bill would prohibit DCF from doing that unless it's needed to maintain their SSI eligibility or comply with federal asset limits. And DCF would still continue to act as their rep payee. And there are some avenues where they could still use those funds if needed for the youth's care, but they have to notify some people first. And DCF will work with the state treasurer to set up accounts and do kind of the administrative part of it. The next sections are sections 4 through 8. And those section numbers will change as we make changes. This will allow unaccompanied homeless youth, those youth who are experiencing homelessness, and are also not in the physical custody of their parent or guardian. Something we don't really hear or talk about, but it is here in Vermont. For several years, those numbers were around 50 something or so, as reported through our school systems. And in the past 5 years, that number has more than doubled, and is now, I think the last year was 132. Unaccompanied homeless youth, and those are just the youth who are showing up to school. We know when youth are kind of out on their own and they don't have a way to access food, medical care, those necessary things, they often stop showing up to school. So that's probably an undercount. What this bill does is allow those youth to go through a certification process through a school district homeless liaison, directors of state-funded or federally funded emergency shelters, and homeless youth programs, continuum of care lead agencies, the chief juvenile defender, or the Vermont Network Against Domestic or Sexual Violence are the folks who could certify a youth. And with this certification, they can obtain a non-driver ID or a license or a learner's permit. They can get their birth certificate. They can consent to full medical care. Imagine you're a child trying to learn in school and you have a raging toothache, and no one can take you to fix that problem. It also allows you to consent to shelter and housing services. There's some other things we're kind of still navigating how we can make that possible for youth. So more to come on that. And I just want to say people sometimes are, a little aghast at this idea. This is not a new concept. This is Vermont catching up to a lot of other states. You might be surprised to know that most of this language is modeled after Florida's statute. 33 states and counting have this kind of legislation on the books. And I will now pass it over to Rep. Duncan.
Thank you, Rep. Bill. Last spring, as referenced, we took various testimony on different child protection issues. And one of those areas we took testimony was on the status of our long existing statute on protections for children who are being transported way back when I was first here eons ago. The policy used to be if a kid needed to be moved from one group home to another or anywhere in the system, the sheriffs were contracted to do that. And their policy was, well, you call us, we shackle, we assume you need law enforcement. So these were kids being moved from one group home, one unsecured group home to another, and they were taken in shackles. So that law made a fundamental change, but we're following up and finding out that there were a lot of gaps in it still. For one thing, we couldn't get data on the situation. We asked for it several times, and it took a year for them to pull out the data on what was happening now. There were still a number of kids going in shackles with belly chains, they're called, some waist chains. So we really wanted it to be sort of more structured, bring it up to date, require some oversight actions like documentation. If there's a belief, we're not saying you can't ever use restraints, but you have to document why it was necessary, why it was the least restrictive form to safely transport that child. So that transportation part is the first part. And it includes asking the department to come back and let us know, how are they enforcing that? What structures have they put in place? The section, and we also are asking, the chair of judiciary here. Oh, he left. Okay, well, behind his back. No, I've been speaking with him. We want to ask the Criminal Justice Council to look at their use of force policy and make sure that they have some consistent protections. This statute has always only addressed formal transports of children in DCF custody, not other situations. And so we're going to be asking them to check into what's going on with their use of force policy and dealing with children. The next major part is about restraint and seclusion in children's residential facilities. And we were kind of shocked by some of the testimony we heard last spring about it occurring and about maybe the lack of adequate clarity and oversight. There wasn't anything in statute that established rules about it. There are regulations for the licensing of homes that set out parameters. And I have to just, a lot of the regulations have good stuff in them, but I have to give a little tweak on some of the issues. There was one part that said the decision about making a strip search of a child, okay, who's going into a secure residence, has to be individualized. And it shall be deemed to be reasonable suspicion if the child has any of these categories, which doesn't actually sound individualized if they're automatically deemed to fit the criteria for certain reasons. So it's really about, a lot of it is taken from the existing regs, but formalizing them, putting some parameters around what can or can't happen. And I have to say, I worked very closely with DCF on this. They were concerned that some of the things we wanted to see done might kind of close the door on something that needed to be, in rare circumstances, still needed to be an opportunity. So we wrote language around that, and I think we've come up with a good start. It will also require providing data that would be on the DCF website, on their outcome indicator sites, what the rates are going forward. So that's the main part of that one. It's maybe about 10 pages total. And I can, anybody who wants to go through details, it still is a work in process. We've involved the major stakeholders. We took some testimony last week, but we're taking some more testimony and hoping to actually wrap it up by the end of tomorrow. But the current draft is still being tweaked. Has the definitions for the different kinds of restraint and different kinds of situations. And the last piece is a very brief one that has to do with one of the things that Representative McGill and I found in our conversations last fall. There's an area, a particular area where there's federal funds available for young people who are coming out of DCF. and getting additional services that we are not accessing in large part because it requires a judicial oversight piece, and our judiciary doesn't have authority for that oversight. We also don't want judiciary to suddenly take on a big new task, and they're not interested in doing that. But it really appears from the federal law that it would be very minimal. So we're asking DCF and the judiciary to look into that and see what they could come up with so that we could start accessing those resources. And those are my 3 parts.
And then the last section, other than the effective dates, is a prenatal engagement and family support working group. You may remember last spring, there was a lot of news about a lawsuit where DCF was involved with someone who had given birth, and it turns out they had been keeping a pregnancy calendar. So this working group is to address that. The lawsuit is kind of still happening, and we expect that the judge will make recommendations. So we didn't just want to change statute and then possibly have to do it again. So we have this working group, and we talked, the department is supportive. We work together. I think we have a really strong membership with a lot of perspectives, and they will really just examine the current use of the pregnancy calendar. Currently, there's no guidance and no real information on how one gets on that calendar and what that means. So we want to clarify that and really just explore how we can be better supporting our pregnant neighbors who are struggling and supporting families and see if perhaps there are better practices that might lead to better outcomes for families.
So it's still being worked on vote.
I think tomorrow, we have a lot of testimony today. We'll be doing some markup tomorrow, and we have a lot to get done. So we're going to get it out tomorrow.
Sounds like you're one of those committees that might be working a lot today. All right, questions?
Representative Mary Howard from Brunswick City. Was there ever any discussion regarding DCX social workers when they meet with children and juveniles, providing like a safe, neutral place instead of having them be at the police department or in parking lots or in hotel rooms? I've known 2 social workers who have left their positions. One was beaten up, and the other just couldn't take the schedule that she had to take. They're just social handling.
There was not in terms of this bill. We have had discussions about that around the whole bigger discussion of what they call the high-end system of care, so that there's adequate resources for the kids who fit in that category who currently have been held in a one-on-one in a hotel room situation. So it is not addressed in this bill.
Do you think it will be addressed going forward in any bill?
I would say that the department is actually working very aggressively on it. It's partly a budget issue. They have reduced very substantially already the amount of money for those situations because they feel that they've reduced the need for it. The ways they've reduced the need is a much longer discussion, which we find very problematic because it's $4.3 million for 3 kids. That's $4,000 per day per bed for that program. So there are other issues, but we don't disagree that the description of the problem you're describing really does need to be addressed. And people are very conscious of it, so it's not in this bill.
And it has needed to be addressed for years.
Yes, basically ever since Woodside closed.
Yes, exactly. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Any other questions? Great. Thank you both. for those details. All right, our last two topics for today. Representative Kornheiser, we're talking about the tax policy and then kind of give an update on the process for moving eventually the education language.
Gosh, I have so many
So many.
objects for this.
I don't know if my head is actually cut off because I'm not sure if Martin, but I sit down anyway. Hi, Emily Kornheiser, representative from Brattleboro and chair of the Ways and Means Committee. I'm here on two very separate topics. The first is more of a public service announcement than anything else. So there are many components that were written into Act 73 that require follow-up this session. And they're sitting in a number of different committees. And I just wanted to provide sort of a flight plan update to that. So the originating bill for that is in the Education Committee. They are working on it. One of them can tell you about it. I'm not going to do that. But I'm sure they're all happy to talk to you about it or not, as the case may be. That bill is going to leave whatever form it is in. When it is ready, it will leave the Education Committee. That will likely be after the crossover deadline. It's received an exception for crossover. I would like to also say that this does not mean that we will be on the same schedule we were on last year. We are not staying here until June. Not going to happen. Just want to put that out into the ether. We're all still leaving in May. So that bill will leave the Education Committee. It will come to the Ways and Means Committee. At that point, we are going to add a number of sections into the bill that we have been working on in committee up until this point. Some of them are sort of drafted as committee bills. Some of them are just drafted as standalone language, frankly, depending on the mood of the attorney who drafted them that day. So those include some language on special education to ensure that whatever format we move to for special education is clear on maintenance of effort requirements. We have two different special education paths already in Act 73, and there is likely a third path that will be built into the modeling for that. So that's one section. There is also reserve guidance that we have worked on for districts and requirements for the Agency of Education to work on that further. There is school construction language that we are working on right now. There is pre-kindergarten language that is spending time in the Human Services Committee. And then we'll spend a little bit of time in the Education Committee, and then we'll come to the Ways and Means Committee. That might just be like emails and not official referrals, just so you know. And then two other pieces of tax policy related to property taxes is our tax classifications work. That's the work to have a different rate for second homes than commercial properties or rental properties or farms or homesteads. And our work to change our reappraisal and appraisal system so that we can have fair valuation of properties no matter where in the state you live. So those are all the different components that will all go into that great big Act 73 Part 2 bill that we will then send over to the Senate. But like I said, that will be after crossover. There's also some other outstanding issues related to transportation funding that need some work, and I'm sure something else that is not on my list right now. But those are sort of the components that really like all wrap around the essential pieces of Act 73 that get the most attention. So that's my public service announcement. I'm now going to hop to a totally different topic. Are you ready? Okay, that's me like watching my brain. So every year, your House Ways and Means Committee, almost every year, has a miscellaneous tax bill. I think most committees have some sort of miscellaneous housekeeping bill. Ours is a very interesting mix this year. So it includes sort of the standard technical updates that we've gotten from the administration. A lot of them this year happen to be from property valuation and review. Some of them are closing loopholes. One of the interesting things about being on Ways and Means is you can like sometimes read on the internet ways that people advise to avoid taxes. And then the tax department sees that and then they send us statutory language to adopt. So that's fun if you ever want to start around for that and send it to us. So there's a number of technical updates that I'm not gonna get into right now. There is some updates about sort of consistency and treatment from department around fee language or the ability of departments or branches of government, frankly, to levy fees outside of sort of the legislative jurisdiction. It has been a long-standing tradition that the legislature is who moves new revenue. That can't be done without legislative authority. We very, very rarely delegate that to the administration or to the judiciary. And so just sort of making sure we have consistency and treatment there. And then there are two other topics that is mostly why I'm talking to you about this today. One is the purchase and use tax. So we're gonna, as folks might or might not know, the transportation fund has an ever increasing deficit in it. There was a request from the administration to move purchase and use revenue. That's basically sales tax for vehicles, shorthand. From a portion of that goes to the education fund. There was an ask from the administration to move that into the transportation fund. If we did just that and nothing else, we would just be increasing people's property taxes. And I don't think any of us want to do that. And so one portion of the bill that we're working on is how to move a portion of standing revenue from the meals and rooms tax from the general fund into the education fund. And then how to move some of the money from the purchase and use tax from the education fund to the transportation fund. Isn't that so fun? And then at the end of the day, it's really just moving $10 million from the general fund to the transportation fund, but we've like added extra words and math just to make it more complicated for everyone. The last thing that I want to talk about is federal tax changes and conformity with federal tax law. I think I talked about this in the very first caucus, and we've done a lot of work since then, and we've gotten a lot of new information since then. So when HR 1 passed this summer, that's the big ugly bill or the big beautiful bill or whatever you want to call it. When HR 1 passed, there were a lot of changes to federal tax law. And a lot of the federal changes to tax law, personal income actually don't flow through to Vermont definitions because of work we did during the previous administration. However, most of the corporate tax definitions and many of the business tax definitions do flow through to Vermont tax law. And so if we did what we frankly usually do, which is annually saying, yes, our state tax definitions match up to federal tax definition. If we did that this year, we would be creating a hole for the fiscal year that we're living in right now, fiscal year 26, the budget adjustment already passed in, of $21 million. And for next fiscal year, for the budget that is currently being worked on in House Appropriations, it would be a hole of $34 million. And that hole sort of keeps on growing for a little bit. And so there are a lot of really good policy reasons to separate our tax code from the federal tax code to make us frankly more resilient to what seems like an ever-changing landscape at the federal level. But also we need to make sure that we're retaining the revenues that we have in the tax structure that we have in order to make sure that Vermonters can get their needs met and that they have fair taxation under the law. So we are looking at a combination of ways that we are separating ourselves from federal tax law and ways that we are going to align ourselves with federal tax law in order to not create too much complication. Most of the details of that are really like pretty deeply in the weeds, and I'm not going to get into that today. I'm happy to answer questions offline about it. But it's various ways of amending limitations on business interest deductions, expensing depreciable assets, a lot of really strange stuff about international intellectual property and something called the qualified small business stocking exclusion. So I'm happy to get into that offline with anyone, but just wanted to let you know that what was sort of originally an interesting policy challenge that Ways and Means was grappling with, as we've gotten more and more information from other states, has become a pretty significant fiscal picture that we're grappling with. And we're hopeful that we would pass this miscellaneous tax bill with all of these very varied provisions in it. We'll vote it out at the end of this week. but it's still very much in flux, some of the final details.
Thanks. So I'm Rep. Karen Dolan, filling in for Rep. Houghton, who's back, but not here. And so are there any questions on either of those topics that were shared?
Is there a microphone somewhere?
Yeah.
I can't.
I've got it covered.
David here from Shasbury. I'm wondering about I think it's the second to last topic, the transportation fund, the purchase and use, and reiterate that a little bit. David said, but can you talk about how much in dollars that would be likely to be this year or next year? Yeah. You basically moving all of that purchase and use funding out of education and now into transportation.
No, we are not doing all of it. It's actually, I don't have the exact percentages in front of me, I'm sorry. It's something like changing from a third to 27%, that kind of shift. It's really like a few percentage points shift that will move $10 million over, and then over.
So it's just $10 million.
Yes, and the two funds are expected to grow at the same rate. So it's not, what is sort of an even swap today would be an even swap in a few years as well. And none of this is finalized. The committee has not had a comprehensive conversation about it. Lots still needs to be figured out.
Candace White from Waitsville. Can I just add to that? So transportation revenues, so right now, 1/3 of purchase and use taxes go into the education fund. This proposal is to slowly pull them back over time.
It's not, actually.
Oh,
So
Okay, we're gonna-
yeah.
We're gonna stop right here. We're gonna stop. We're not gonna have a debate. We're gonna let the committee do their work and then we will update everyone.
I think there's another question.
Rep leaders. On that distinction between individuals and the impact of federal law on individual population and accessible to Vermont, versus corporate. I didn't quite understand your explanation. Is that being addressed? Is that being made up in some way in the work?
Yes, so most of the personal income tax code is already separated from federal tax code. That's something we did with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in Vermont for all the same reasons that we're making these corporate changes this year. And so we're essentially doing what we did with the personal income tax to separate out our tax code definitions in order to make sure that our corporate and business tax code is as resilient to sort of federal changes as our personal income tax code.
Great. We have time for one or two more questions, if anybody has. Okay, well, looks like we're set. So I'll do a last call for any announcements that anybody has before we wrap up.